A program director, Dr. Bala Ganapati, program convener, Dr. Zairunisha, other worthy colleagues and the participants who have yet again joined us today for the Day 3, Part 1 session of the 1-week-long online faculty development program on philosophical methodologies in higher education, research and teaching. So today is Professor Raghuram Raju, and he brings a session on the topic Deleuze for India, relooking at the relationship between literature and politics in the West and in India. So I now request you, sir, to take over and begin with your session. Over to you, sir, and thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Nidhi. And I apologize for leaving you early yesterday. So what I propose to do today is what Professor Balaganapati asked me to do when we are discussing about these topics. He said, mix Indian and Western so that it's fair deal, which is fine with me. So today, I would be interested in discussing with you something which is has been intriguing me, and that is when I joined for philosophy at University of Hyderabad, I got the feeling that philosophy means Western philosophy, and within Western philosophy, it is largely philosophy of science, analytical philosophy. Other things are taught, but not with that kind of, enthusiasm and rigor that are associated with analytical philosophy. I had stalwarts who were my teachers, Professor Ramchandra Gandhi, Professor Suresh Chandra, Professor Y.N. Chopra, Professor S.A. Zaidi, who later became Professor of Philosophy at Delhi University. So these were the stalwarts who were there at that time. And they were really going gaga about publishing in Mind, publishing in philosophy and phenomenological research, ratio, then, synthesis and things like that. Cambridge Journal, Royal Society Journal, philosophy. So that was something which I confronted suddenly when I joined for philosophy. But then somewhere along the way, I also found outside these lectures, there are some cracks to this enthusiasm. There were some dents to this, euphoria about doing philosophy of science or analytical philosophy. For instance, my beloved teacher, Professor Ramchandra Gandhi, would be talking about Upanishads. He gave series of lectures in Lions Club or Rotary Club on Keno Upanishad, Prasno Upanishad, and things like that. So then I saw that person who is his teacher, who was a direct student of Professor Peter Strawson, has published in Philosophical Studies, which is a very difficult journal to publish, Rydell, the publishers at that time. Why was he showing these streaks outside the classroom for things other than this? So that intrigued me for a long time, but I couldn't express it because it would have been in those days very naive on the part of anybody to raise these questions in the mainstream philosophy. On the other hand, I have seen there are traditional scholars on Indian philosophy who are active but not sufficiently challenging or creative. So if you're doing analytical philosophy, my teachers were all the time were interested in making a new point so that their articles gets published in these, world famous philosophy journals like Mind. My teachers published in Mind. So there is this competition, there is this race to say something new. But when I turn towards the Indian philosophy scene, the scene was not very enthusiastic. They looked profound, but they looked less innovative, less creative, less challenging. They looked more in terms bordering along the lines of conformity, saying things, discovering things that were there in these profound texts of philosophy from classical India. So this is something that intrigued me. So I was tossed between saying something new, creating some new knowledge and publishing it in the world forums. And then on the other hand, you have the traditional scholarship that were trying to learn texts that were classical. So I was not in a position to judge the virtues or otherwise of this learning through conformity or producing new knowledge, because I found that it's too early for me to take any stand on it. I just joined. I was not even in a position to say these things because my competence in communicating in English was very poor. Because that is the first time I shifted from Telugu medium to English medium, from commerce to philosophy. So, to talk to people that I listed now with this background is very, very intimidating, even though they were very nice, kind, and generous people. Very, very extraordinarily generous. They never made me feel that I have all these, limitations or even defects in scholarship. Encouraged me. If I am what I am today, it is squarely because of my great teachers at University of Hyderabad. Really, really great. Without them, I wouldn't have even, caught only 1% of what I could do, at the age of 63. So that was something that was happening. So I was tilting toward this, that, and the other. And then it suddenly occurred to me that while reading Wittgenstein or while reading Karl Popper's Logic of Scientific Discovery or Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolution, Agonist Method by Faraday, Philosophical Investigations of the later Wittgenstein, Tractatus of the early, and then Principia Mathematica of Russell and others. It suddenly struck to me that there is something amiss about the way in which these thinkers are taught to us in India. Even my teachers were not aware of this thing. See, for instance, while reading Locke's True Treatise, you would, on human nature, you would all realize that he was responding to Filmer. Okay. So it's like if you read an answer sheet with a question paper in mind, then you understand the importance of the question, of the answers thing. Suppose if you are given only the answer sheets and without a question paper, what will you do? You will read answers, but you will not be able to evaluate whether this is an answer to that question. It's an essay, it is not an answer. So there is a difference between writing an essay and writing an answer. Okay? In the West, all these thinkers who are taught to us in India are taught in a mode of question and answer. If Filmer is a question, Locke is an answer. But when my teacher started teaching these texts to me, I did not find the question in front of me. They were only teaching, this is what Locke said. The Filmer was absent. Okay? And without Filmer, understanding Locke looked almost like ritualistic. That is, it's like if you go to a place of worship, the priest will recite slokas to you. They will do a good job. But then if you ask them, what is the meaning of the sloka that you are reciting? In most of the cases, they may not know. So I found that the teaching in India was getting very ritualistic. So then let me just clarify this point with an incident that happened to me. In Hyderabad, where I was teaching earlier, I was asked by a university department to evaluate their correspondence course answer sheets. And then they sent me 2,200 answer sheets. Correspondence course has several of them. And then I found that the answers were fantastic answers. You know, they were answers which are much qualitatively much superior to the answers that I would get from the brilliant students who take admission in the University of Hyderabad Philosophy Department. So next time, so I passed out of them. Next time when they asked me, because I sent the answer sheets very fast, so they were very impressed by my timing. So they said, why don't you this time set a question paper to us? So I said, okay, I will send a question paper, but send me a sample answer sheet. So they said, do you mean a sample question paper or a question paper? I said, no, I don't want a question paper. I want an answer sheet. They said, nobody asks something like that. If you are asked to set a question paper, you ask for a sample question paper. That's the thing. I said, I don't want a sample question paper. I want a sample answer sheet. And they said, no, we can't give it. Then I said, I can't set questions to you. Then they took 1 or 2 days and then got back to me saying that we are curious to know, we can't send you the question paper, answer paper, but we are curious to know why you want an answer paper to set a question. Then I told them, look, all these answers that you gave me have nothing to do with the question paper. All of them have decided, they prepared to write 4 answers, 4 essays. Whatever may be your question paper, the answers would be what they have prepared. So they are not answer to the question. Okay, they are essays. So if they don't respond to your question, I thought it is better if I set question papers, which they anyway will write. Okay. So the predicament of philosophy in India was something like that. There were answers, but I didn't know what is a question paper. So that kept bothering me. There is no purva paksha in the debate. So whatever I was learning by these great teachers is all becoming it's almost becoming like a rote learning. There's no connection. Why am I reading this? I don't know. But if you ask me what is this, I will tell you. Okay. What is the Purva Paksha for Wittgenstein's stand on language is public? You don't know. So in fact, I asked Professor Suresh Chandra, who said that language is private, to which Wittgenstein responded by saying language is public. He didn't have an answer. You know how great philosopher Professor Suresh Chandra is. You know, he's my mentor, and I have a lot of regards to him. But the general scenario, this was the general scenario at that time. And then I turned, I did my PhD in political philosophy because you got to survive. Even that was not acceptable at that time when I went to IIT Kanpur to do a PhD, and then I wanted to do political philosophy. They said, they all were shocked, as if I was committing a blasphemy, because again in IIT Kanpur, the in things were philosophy of science and analytical philosophy of language. Other things are not taken very seriously. And then when I was doing my research, I completed my work, then took to teaching. At that time, I was haunted by this problem and I didn't have an answer. So it is at that time I came across the writings of B.K. Matilal and J.N. Mohanty, Daya Krishna, and others. And I found them very relieving, because here you have an attempt where there is a relationship made between modern Western philosophy and classical Indian philosophy, or as Daya Krishna puts it brilliantly, a dialogue between traditional Pandits and modern logicians. So that is the track, that is the method that was going on. And then I started reading them seriously. But suddenly I found there is something wrong with this method. And what is wrong with this method is that there is a temporal imbalance between the two aspects that are related. That is, the comparison is between a modern Western philosopher and a traditional Indian philosophy. So it is a Nyaya of Gautama and Frege or Russell. So I found that there is a temporal imbalance, and it was almost like a match between the veterans versus the team that is playing with England. Definitely the veterans will lose because of the age. Okay. So India in this debate was losing before the match began. So I said that this is a very defeatistic exercise, though very novel, very exciting in the beginning. So it is, and then I came across writings of people who are not making a temporal imbalance, which I mentioned to you, between the classical Indian and modern Western, but they were making a comparison between two modern philosophers. For instance, there is Aishwarya Kumar, who compares B.R. Ambedkar with Walter Benjamin. Both of them are modern thinkers. There is no problem. There is Azai Zakaria, who compares Gandhi with Derrida. Now both of them are modern, 20th century. But then there was some problem that I faced while reading these people. That is, imagine a student, young student, who reads these writings and then wants to read Derrida. He finds a lot of works on Derrida, by Derrida. But if he was to read Gandhi, the works will be less compared to Derrida. Similarly with Ambedkar and Walter Benjamin. So I thought that there is a need to make Indian texts available before you make these comparisons. So that's a point that I thought I would do. A person who did this remarkably was Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan. It is Radhakrishnan who, before comparing Plato and Shankara, has translated, when he was the ambassador to erstwhile Russia, USSR, translated Brahma Sutras, Bhagavad Gita, Dhammapada, Upanishads, and made these things available before he made these comparisons. Now, the other person who solved the problem of temporal imbalance is my teacher, Professor Ramchandra Gandhi. He is the first person in 20th century, a remarkable contribution by Ramchandra Gandhi. He is the only person in 20th century amongst the philosophical circles who took the 20th century Indian thinkers seriously. Okay? He brought a philosophical dimension to Ramakrishna Paramahamsa and Sharada Devi, Swami Vivekananda, Sri Aurobindo and Mother, Jeddu Krishnamurti, Ramana Maharshi and Alagama. Okay? And he calls them as 7 sages. 7 sages. So that is but it is a very brief kind of an introduction, but not pursued very much. But then that's an insight which is very good. So when you turn towards the academic arena, I found that many of our great teachers have imported a lot of big scholars, big thinkers like Plato, Hegel, Kant, Marx, Locke, Hobbes, and all these people. They brought these big statues, imported these big statues, but did not have a place to keep them. Because, if you're working on one thinker, that you can never compete with the world, because there are so many people who have spent a lifetime working on one aspect of one thing. So it is becoming very unmanageable for students to understand what is going on in frontline research on a particular thinker. So I symbolically present it as that it is like you bought a big statue, but your house is small. You didn't have a correspondingly a big place to keep the statue in your place. So it is at that time I found that many philosophers who are taught in India have been force-fit into students. And that was not doing well. Well, that is one of the reasons why we have not produced good research, because there is a lot of force fitting. Because of the force fitting, the only way to survive, is by mugging up, by making a ritualistic, narration of it. So while doing work on this EPG Pathshala, I asked people, why did they do research on the topics? And many of them didn't have a clue. Okay, there is no Purva Paksha. And if you look at any paper published in any journal in the West, the first paragraph, you have to display in one paragraph all the work done in that on that idea to be able to write the second paragraph. Take anything and take most of the journals in India, you will not have this first paragraph. They will start with what I think. And this is the problem committed by even our senior most teachers whom I adore and respect and fall at their feet. This has damaged us structurally. In other words, if you take a student, first thing they will be asked to do in the West was, what is the idea on which you want to work? And if you say that this is an idea, how much have you read on that topic? Nook and corner of that topic. It's like a scanning everything before you can ever think about, start discussing about the possibility of working on the topic. Now tell me how many students in India were asked by the teachers to do a similar job. If you don't do it, then your research is parallel and your research only accumulates without accumulating. You are accumulating without accumulating. Okay, and if you accumulate without accumulating, it is going to be not of any consequences. Only when you accumulate with accumulation, it makes sense. And this is not just in philosophy. This is what is happening across the social sciences and humanities in India. So this first paragraph is missing. And without that first paragraph, you will not be able to make any contribution to the subject. So what do? One thing that some of my teachers did was they pursued Western philosophy, Professor Suresh Chandra, and the law, except last part, but rest of it, Professor Rajendra Prasad. There are others who abandoned Western philosophy on which they have been trained and started turning towards Indian classics. Professor K.J. Shah started, researching, reading Natya Sastra, like that. Daya Krishna started looking at Vedas and Upanishads and things like that. So this is one branch of people. Second branch of people, I found both of them not, to my taste. That is not what I wanted to do. Okay, I didn't want to go back to classical texts. At the same time, I did not want to pursue Western philosophy. So what is an option before me? It is at that time, as I said, I read people like Matilal and all, but I found there are a lot of problems with them. So then I came up with an idea. That is, I wanted to read Western philosophy for India. That is, it is not that I want to read Western philosophy without a Purva Paksha. I want to have a purpose for my reading. So I call this as, I wanted to bend Western philosophy without breaking and bring it to India. So if you ask me, why am I reading a Western philosopher? My answer immediately would be very pragmatic answer, that I'm interested in reading this person because I wanted to use him, make sense of him in India. So this is a very pragmatic method that I have set in front of me. And this is what I call as bending Western philosopher without breaking, or alternatively, calibrating Western philosophy for India. Calibrating Western philosophy for India. So I'm not against Western philosophy, but I will not do Western philosophy the way in which it is done today. I will do Western philosophy keeping in mind my domestic requirements in India. My domestic requirements in India. So this is the background for what I'm going to discuss briefly in 20 minutes to you about some work I have done on Deleuze and Guattari. Deleuze and Guattari wrote this famous book called Kafka, on Kafka. And they made a wonderful use. Imagine, somebody, a philosopher in India, writing a book on Nirmal Verma. No, why not? This is done there. Okay. Do you have a person, who Professor Ramchandra Gandhi gave a talk, Nirmal Verma Memorial Lecture at India International Center, Delhi, on his short story. That's why, Ramchandra Gandhi is a very important person. Tell me about other people. There are no profound literary works in India to philosophize. Why is it that we have not done it? We have not done it because the stage that is set by our teachers did not allow that kind of play to be enacted. There is something very, very constraining about that stage that they have set into us. Okay. So I call it as bending Western philosophy without breaking. Now, bending is a very interesting notion. Now, in Kafka's Castle, Deleuze and Guattari find that everybody bends, even the judges bend in trial. Okay, so bending is very important. Bending is one of the important junctures where something that is straight line is trying to become a circle. Trying to become a circle. It's a very important exercise. But I want to read 2 lines from my teacher Ramchandra Gandhi, who says something similar about bending. In his book, I Am Thou, the Meditations on the Truth of India. And I quote, he says, the letters of Devanagari have their head covered, as do bhaktas of many sampradayas in India during the worship. Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Sikhs. So it is this bending that is very important to us. So now let's get into Kafka. And Deleuze and Guattari makes 3 important points about Kafka. And one is that they make a distinction between minor literature and major literature. And then they go on to claim that Kafka's literature is a minor literature. And then they add that minor is not outside the major, but is imbricated inside the major. So it's a part of the major. So it's not that there is a major and there is a minor, one is outside the other. There is a major and there is a minor, but the minor is inside the major. And the second point that they make is minor literature is political. For them, everything that is there in minor literature is political. The third point, the last one, is that minor literature has a collective value. Has a collective value. Now, just take these three definitions of minor and major. That there is a distinction between minor literature and major literature, and minor is a part of the major. Minor literature is political, and three, minor literature is collective. And now ask this question as an aside. How do you look at Indian literatures? Do you look in today's context? What is the predicament of Indian literatures? Is it minor or major? What is the major literature today? What is the role of different languages spoken in different states today? Are they major or minor? They look minor, ma'am, but you take any English newspaper and compare it with the newspapers in vernacular, bhashas. The bhasha newspapers are more in number than the English newspaper. That is one of the biggest complaints about English newspapers. People read local, regional newspapers rather than, or regional, local news channels are watched more than the national news channels. So you think it is minor because we are all in metropolitan places, but actually it is not minor. It is projected to be minor. It is, you have done a damage in making it as minor when it is major. This is despite all this modernization of the Macaulay and things like that. Okay, anyway, that's a different topic. I have a lot of things to say, but I will cut it short. So there are these three things. And then, according to Deleuze and Guattari, Kafka's literature is a minor literature. Now, I wanted to now disagree with Deleuze and Guattari by deterritorializing them. Using their own deterritorialization, I want to use it against them. And I do it in the following way. I want to claim that not only literature, but all arts in the West, are minor. Okay? In relation to the major, which is modernity. Modernity came and excluded everything from the pre-modern. This is very clearly stated in Descartes, who excludes everything from cognition. The only thing that he accepts is cognition. Everything from pre-modern is rejected. Childhood is rejected, nature is rejected, mythology is rejected, culture is rejected, literature is rejected, poetry is rejected by him in this discourse on method. Now, all those things that are rejected by modernity are for literature. Look at literature, see, with the rise of modernity, there is also a rise of zooming of literature. The proliferation of art coincides with the rise of modernity. So I want to establish a causal relation between rise of modernity and the proliferation of art and literatures in the West. That is, with the advent of modernity, modernity rejected everything from the pre-modern. And I wanted to now ask you, what are the themes of literature and art in the West, the Renaissance time? You go to any gallery, it will be Pieta, it will be Sermon on the Mount, it could be the Last Supper, it is, the Fall, it is Madonna, it is nature, all these things which we call, it is countryside, all that which we call as modern art is about the contents of modern art or from the pre-modern. Invariably, there is not a single modern object that is painted by these people. Not even electricity, no steam engine, no bulb, nothing. What is painted by them is from the pre-modern, the childhood, the nature, Theati Islands, and things like that. So I wanted to claim that what is rejected by modernity is reclaimed by literature and art in imagination. So literature, both minor and major, are quarantined by modernity in the West. They have been housed within the galleries so that they don't become a part of reality. They don't become part of reality. They are non-causal, but they make no intervention in your modern life. They are framed, and each frame is a prison for the contents that it frames. Okay, so that is the kind of a thing that happens. So I wanted to claim that this claim that Deleuze and Descartes makes, saying that minor literature is political and minor literature is collective, is not correct. It is false. It is false because what is political in the West, what is collective in the West is not literature, minor or major. What is political in the West and what is collective in the West is capitalism, science, technology, modernity. They are the major political voices that reign supreme in the West, and not literature. Literature is read, and forgot. Literature in the West has not played any major political role. So to say that minor literature is political by Deleuze and Guattari is factually incorrect. This is where I'm trying to contest them. Now, so what do we do? So they did not make any sense in the West, and what they said about minor literature is not correct. So we can reject them. I reject them in the West, but I don't reject them completely. What I do instead is I bring them to India and to see if they make some sense here. As I said, they did not make any sense. They cannot make any sense in the West, despite their claims. Okay, I wanted to try whether they make any sense in the West, in India. That is what I'm trying to do. When I try this and turn my attention towards India, I find that there are three important literary figures, Thoreau, Ruskin, and Tolstoy, who are very important literature people. Excuse me. And they are the ones who have become a major influence on Mahatma Gandhi. You cannot think about Mahatma Gandhi without the influence of these three thinkers on him. And after reading these people, Gandhi did not write another novel or a short story or a collection of poems. He was inspired by these literary giants of the West and turned this inspiration for a political program of Indian national movement. You understand the connection? Now, how is literature traveling? Literature is not traveling to make another literature. It is not like Eliot getting influenced by Ezra Pound, okay, or Eliot getting influenced by Edgar Allan Poe or symbolists. Okay, it is literature which is inspiring the political movement through Gandhi and Indian national movement. So now you see that while literature is not political in the West, literature, that is minor literature in India, has become political. Is that clear? Or you want me to elaborate? It's clear, okay. If it's clear, then clear, sir. Okay, fine. Now, if that's clear, then my next point. Gandhi is not just an individual. He is called Mahatma by Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore. And it is Gandhi who calls Gurudev Tagore as Gurudev. So there is a different theme altogether. I will not go into the discussion. So Rabindranath Tagore defines what is Mahatma. Mahatma means not an individual self. It is a self where everybody is represented. All the Atmans of people are represented by Mahatma. That's why it's called Mahatma. In K.C. Bhattacharya's terminology, it's over-personal self. That means Mahatma does not mean like doctor degree. No. This doctor degree will refer to you, but Mahatma does not refer to you. It refers to everyone who is around, everybody. This is an idea which is there. And this is an idea that reverberates collectivity. So there is no collectivity to literature in the West. There is no political, aspect with regard to literature in the West. There is no collectivity to literature in the West, as envisaged by Deleuze and Guattari in the context of Kafka. On the contrary, when I bring them to India, I find that minor literature in the form of Ruskin, Tolstoy, and Thoreau has inspired people like Gandhi, who were very major participants in, along with other people like Tagore, I mentioned, many other people. And Gandhi is not a single personal self. He is an embodiment of collectivity. And the idea of collectivity is symbolically designated by this title, Mahatma. So that's where he makes a very important relationship. So while there is a major, the minor is, I agree with Deleuze and Guattari, that minor is within the major, that I agree. However, I don't agree with them that minor is political and minor is collective. And at least they don't meet these two requirements in the West. But when I bring them to India, there I find that they meet in India, these two requirements are met. In India, minor literature has given rise to a major movement in the world history called Indian national movement. Minor literature also is collective in the form of Mahatma and things like that. So it is in this context I find that Deleuze and Guattari don't make much sense in the West, the place of their origin. And they make sense in the context of making me to understand the relationship between literature, particularly minor literature, and Indian national movement, which is a political movement. It is in this context I find also that they are collective through the idea of Mahatma. So this is the reason why I think I undertake this job of bending Western philosophers for India to make sense like this. So this is a method that I have been following when I read Western philosophers. I read them to make sense, to bend them for India. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir, for this very interesting talk, trying to relate philosophy and literature, and also talking about the methodologies that are being used and how we should, as an Indian scholar, make use of the methodologies that are existent elsewhere, and also how to do the comparative study, which you have invented your own in your works. Sharing that knowledge and discussing it with us. Friends, if you have any doubts or questions or comments to make, you're most welcome. Basically, try to be brief. And I have one more thing as well to say, like whatever we have discussed yesterday, if you have any questions, I ask you to write down those things so that you can pose them today as well. So I see Dr. Garima raising hand. Dr. Garima, please, but try to be brief.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, sir. Sir, with my limited understanding, I just wanted to ask one question. In the case of Kafka's, when you mentioned that it is minor within the major and it cannot translate into a political movement, can I say with my limitation, if Gandhi could give rise to a political movement, a mass movement, so people were acquainted with that kind of understanding. And if we take Kafka's core philosophy and all, if I'm asking you only, are people ready to take those kind of philosophies to inculcate and translate into political movements, and without any presuppositions, because we have been taught and we have been lived through these common kind of philosophies which Gandhi could give rise, but we cannot take Kafka in that sense.
Yeah, good that you asked this question. It is not readily available to you. Okay? You have to make series of small movements, small corrections, small bends, and it will be easily available to us. And once you open this path, and then you will find directly opens our territories to not only to Indians, but also to the world. Okay? You see now, look at my strategy. My strategy was that there is something fantastical that is achieved by Derrida, Deleuze and Guattari. That is, if I start discussing Kafka, you will not be interested in it. Yes or no?
Yes.
You will not be interested in it. Let me be very clear. Now you see that there is somebody who has already done that work for me. It is established philosophers who, being philosophers and established ones, took interest in a literary figure called Kafka. So it is not Eliot interested in Kafka. It is a philosopher who is interested in Kafka, which is a small move. You have to spend one lifetime to do that. It will not work out. So take that work that is already done in front of you. Study it very closely and dispassionately, and use a word, with open mind. With an open mind, I was interested in this this work for India. I found that it is useful later for India. So I was not going with a preconceived notion. So I very thoroughly scanned that relationship between a literary figure like Kafka and Deleuze and Guattari, two philosophers. And then I looked at their conclusions. And I found that their conclusions have certain limitations. Deleuze and Guattari, if you go back and read that book, become more prophetic and emotional, not rational.
Yeah.
See, they were renowned by Kafka, and emotive charge, they started praising him, where some parts of the praise were not factually fitting into it.
Fitting in, yeah. Sure, sir. Right, sir.
Okay, it's not fitting. So I grabbed that situation. So what did I grab? Suppose if it was done by a literary figure, okay, then if I had, if I have did this kind of tinkering, you would have said, look, philosopher distorting a literary figure's account. Literature, we are not, thoroughly argumentative. We go flattering people and things like that. But it is done by a philosopher. So that is an advantage for me. So if a philosopher, then I can talk to him philosophically. I talk to him. Then I have reduced him there, saying that you are not useful here. Okay? But I gave reasons. After sizing him down, that you are not useful here,
I will use you.
then transporting him to India is easy. Imagine that he is useful there and you want it here. Okay, that will be very heavy. So I first have to slice him there, saying that he is not useful there. Now he becomes less. Then I bring him here. And after bringing him here, I again inflate him. And how do I inflate him? Make my indigenous connections. Then now I bring in Ruskin, not Kafka. See the strategy. Thoreau and Tolstoy. And you cannot say that, they are not important in the West. And no, Indians also will not be able to say that they are not important in the West. They are important. Okay? Whom did they inspire in India? Gandhi. And what is Gandhi? He is not a literature person. He is not Rabindranath Tagore. He's a politician.
Yeah, got your point.
Understand? So now I'm saying that now you have a literature and political connection. And what is Gandhi? And then I use the word Mahatma as defined by Tagore. Mahatma means Maha-Atma, which is collective. So two things that are not met there are met here. It's like, once you make these things, then it is like, Kohli.
Yes, sir. Got your point. Thank you so much, sir.
So, now anybody who see this will be able to now make into bhashas, into Hindi, into Tamil, into these kinds of things. That's the path which is productive. Thank you for asking.
Now we have a next question from Samima Zahra. Samima Zahra, you are unmuted. You can ask your question.
Hello, sir.
Hello, Samima. Great to see you after a long
So good to see you, sir.
Yeah, congrats. How is the little one?
Yeah,
he's not little one.
In
Yes.
his back. He's sitting in his back. It's it's around 7:30 here. It was really so good to see you and listen to your talk. And I as always, you are amazing. And I mean, when you were talking about contextualizing, talking in understanding a philosopher in their space and time, I remember that you have taught all those things to me when I was working under you on my MPhil thesis. And I've been trying to do that, even afterwards. And as a teacher, I try to do that with my students. And this idea of understanding a philosopher in context often the struggle for me that I'm like, and I know there's no easy answer for that, but for me the question is that if you are too much trying to understand philosopher in context and time, sometimes you are looking for an essential philosopher, an essential thinker. And the very attempt to use a philosopher in your own way requires you to take them out of that context. And the problem there is that you use the term bending. And the problem is that how do you know you're not breaking it? Because I know Butler has broken Foucault, Sartre has broken Hegel, Amory has broken Nietzsche. So there are big names who have when they were able to understand philosophers in their context, but when they were using them for their own philosophy, they often broke their system. So how to not do injustice to them, but still be able to take them beyond what they already said. So I know there's no easy answer for that, but would you find what is that fine line that you would say that we should be always aware of?
Yeah, thank you. And I want to tell you that I'm very, very happy. I have two of my students who submitted their MPhil thesis in a record time in University of Hyderabad, both Balagan and Samima. And they are younger to me. I can't praise them. I don't praise my students, but I cannot also not say a word about them. I wanted to just say one. I'm really proud of both of you, Samima and Bala.
Thank you so much.
But I hope you understand the symbolic thing, because I'm told in my family that you should not praise your students because that will curtail their growth. I want you to do them, okay? So
thank you.
Let me take on this, the essential and non-essential. The essential is limited, Samir. Okay, now since it is limited, it is focused and it has an identity. So there is a natural tendency to congregate around the essential, go around it. But all thinkers leave their non-essential things. Okay? And if you employ your ingenuity, you will be and access the non-essential. It is a very broad, it opens up a large vistas. Large vistas. Now, technically speaking, that is possible when you begin with what in philosophy is called as counterfactuals. Okay, if you start with counterfactuals, then it naturally throws you outside the essential into the realm of the non-essential. I always found leaping into the non-essential very important in my research. Very, very important. Now, at the same time, it is not at the cost of or ignoring the essential. I have to tread the essential thoroughly, like an MRI scanner does. But having done that, I use this counterfactual and then leap into the non-essential. But then that's where there is another difference, which you rightly pointed out. How does one bend without breaking? And you've given those instances about Butler and all the examples that you gave. Yes, but in Western scholarship, you were rewarded for breaking. If you don't break, you will not be published. Okay, you will not be published. If you say that, if I read a paper saying that I agree with Samima, nobody will take it. But suppose if I say that I disagree with Samima, then they will start reading it. But there is a different way of showing creativity. And that different way of showing creativity is to bring in this very interesting way of, now you see the strategy that I have taken. I have made Deleuze and Guattari not useful in the West. I broke them. In your, if I had done that, then I am part of all the names that you have mentioned. But I bring him here and make a better use of him where he is very happy. Even though he has lost it there, which is a good lose, it's not a false kind of a thing. Here, he is getting something very big. He's getting Samima a subcontinent. Okay, where, you are saying that, this, he is making sense. Now, that is not breaking. Okay, now that is my strategy. That is my strategy in dealing with this. I don't know whether it makes any sense to you.
I think Samima P has got your answer. Now we have another question from Jayanti ma'am.
Yes, good afternoon, sir. Actually, from yesterday also, your lecture was so powerful and quite highly informative also. So many points, I like your ideas and the way you interpret the text. But there are some problems with me understanding some bending method you are talking about. That how does this bending method works? And suppose I like this idea of something which we are carrying from West and reading the Indians. And but suppose I take Parmenides as an example, that notion of being in Parmenides, and I want to relate it with the Vedant, with Vedant concept of being. So does this bending method will actually help me to understand this? Or can I go in the other way direction also, that is it possible that this bending method, which I am trying to understand the Western parameters and the Western philosophical perspective, and applying this in the Indian context to understand the systems of Indian philosophy or Vedas and Upanishad in a better way, does that thing really works? Because something we have to break. Yes, it's give a clarity when we mix the tradition and do the comparative analysis, but something we lose in the track is that their way of thinking and understanding a particular thing, the notion of being, and Advaita perspective of analyzing the notion of being is totally, I think, two different way. Yes, there is a eternality when Parmenide is talking about being, and here also we find the self is eternal and everlasting and indestructible, whatever explanation we have given. But saying this, we may not, Parmenide is talking the same way, the thought process. I don't think they were similar. The second point is, sir, you are so good that you have, but I'm trying to understand you. Maybe I'm wrong in that. how do you analyze that the way you said that major and a text is major and a text is minor? And is there any specific criteria to define a text as major and a minor? And that also leads to sometimes your approach of understanding. The way I understood, I maybe recognize a text as a minor, maybe somebody treat it as a major. So that subjectivism we cannot deny, the subjective experience of understanding a text, and saying that a text is minor and collective. So something you can, if you can elaborate this point, that what are the criteria making a text?
Yeah, let me just
Thank you.
thank you for asking these two questions. Let me answer the second one first. The major is something which makes sense immediately to people, something that is accepted. But the minor is the one which is not accepted immediately, but makes sense subsequently. So there are a lot of people who are, who accept certain texts as major texts, but then there may be less known people. Okay, let's take this example from history. Hegel was a dominant major philosopher, and Kierkegaard was not. And then what Kierkegaard said about subjectivism is useful even today, which is grossly neglected by Hegel. That's my brief answer to you. That's about major and minor. I want you to refrain from using one Parmenides with another great tradition of Advaita or any other thing. That is not called what I called as a bending. You bend for things to make sense of things that are less known. So less known. So I am not at all, I'm not interested in this, Plato, Shankara, then Parmenides, Vedanta. No, that is not the way. If you look at the trajectory that I have placed before you, I was just trying to see that you make sense of things which are not made sense earlier, not make sense of things which are already made earlier.
So much, sir. I think Vivek Suneja sir has joined us. So I'm sorry for other questions. I would invite Nidhi to welcome our next speaker.
Okay. Then.
And present a vote of thanks to Raghu Ram sir. Hello. Thank you so much, Raju sir. Thank you very much for your questions, for your answers, as well as your lecture. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
It's very wonderful. Yeah.
It was really wonderful experience.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for joining us and giving this very interesting talk. It's again wonderful to listen to you again. Thank you. Yeah, we'll proceed to the next talk. I see Professor Vivek Suneja, who has joined us. Good afternoon, Professor Vivek. How are you doing? Good to see you.
Absolutely. Wonderful to see you again, sir.
Great. Yeah. All set.
Nidhi ma'am, are you here? Nidhi ma'am? Just a second.
Yeah, friends, I'm sure all of you would agree with me that we had a session which is a continuation of yesterday's methodologies, looking at methodologies in Indian tradition and how we look at our own Indian tradition while understanding various philosophical methodologies. And today we had another thought-provoking session with Professor Raghu on looking at Western tradition and how to make use of that Western tradition in making sense of Indian tradition, looking at Indian schools and systems of philosophy, and which has been wonderfully done by him. I'm sure all of you would agree with me that we really had a very engaging session. And continuing that, we are really fortunate to have a wonderful scholar and who is into, I had an opportunity to interact with him personally a couple of times. At least once we had a wonderful discussion personally, and I found him to be thoroughly, deeply philosophical. A person from management who is completely and deeply into philosophical tradition. I really admired his way of looking at things in the first meeting itself, and I thought he should be a part of this webinar, this faculty development program, because of his interest in philosophy and his perspective of looking at his own discipline from philosophical perspective. This is what has attracted me, and that's how Professor Vivek Suneja, a senior scholar and also former Pro Vice Chancellor of Delhi University and presently the Dean of Faculty of Management Studies, is with us. And without
sir. I would like to invite Nidhi ma'am to give a brief and formal introduction of sir. Nidhi ma'am, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So a very good afternoon to our respected resource person for today, Professor Vivek Suneja, and to all the participants. And I welcome you all to the Day 3 Part 2 session of this 1 week faculty development program. So like I said, today we have with us Professor Vivek Suneja, and sir will be conducting a session on the topic Philosophical Foundation in Business and Management Studies. But I would definitely like to introduce you to the participants, sir. So Professor Vivek Suneja is Dean of FMS, University of Delhi. As a Felix Scholar, he studied for his doctoral degree at the University of Reading in the United Kingdom. For over a decade, he taught at various premier universities in Britain, including at the University of Salford, Manchester, and at the Open University of the United Kingdom. Upon his return to India, he joined FMS as professor. He has served as Dean of Planning and as Pro Vice Chancellor of the University of Delhi. Professor Suneja has published several books and papers in the areas of strategy, marketing, entrepreneurship, economics, culture, and public policy. Among his prominent books are Markets, a multidimensional approach to the market economy, published by Routledge, UK, Policy Issues for Business, published by Sage, UK, and The Economics of Marketing, published by Edward Elgar, UK. His most recent book, Economic Theory and Policy Amidst Global Discontent, has been published by Francis and Taylor, UK. Professor Suneja has done consulting and training for several prominent international and national organizations. He is deeply committed to furthering societal well-being. It is my pleasure, sir, to welcome you again. If you remember, you had conducted a session for us on the topic of national education policy, sir, for the FDP that we had conducted with Kamala Nehru College. So my pleasure, sir, in welcoming you again to Ramanujan College, sir. Over to you.
Thank you, Nidhi. Just checking, everybody can hear me?
Yes, sir. You are audible to us.
All right, good. So thank you, Nidhi, thank you, Nisha, and thank you to Professor Bala for inviting me here. When I was approached about this FPB session, I was really struck by the title. And I want to congratulate Ramanujan College and all the organizers, and of course, Professor Bala of the philosophy department from putting this together. This is very unusual, and it's a need of the hour. Philosophical methodologies in higher education. I'd like to ask you where? Who on earth these days talks about philosophical methodologies in higher education? And then you come to something, if I can be more cynical, is almost unheard of. if you ask in my faculty, if you ask my teachers, my faculty members, what this topic means, philosophy of foundation, business and management, and they'd say, why should we be interested at all? What has philosophy got to do with business and management? If you talk to the practitioners in the field, the businessmen, after all, we in FMS or in economics study the behavior of people engaged in economic and business activity. So if you ask traders, industrialists, if you ask Mukesh Ambani or any of the prominent industrialists, for that matter, if you even ask Bill Gates, what is the philosophical foundation of your organization? Many people would struggle. But on the other hand, if you stop the man on the street and ask him, what is your philosophical view of life? He'd also struggle as well, right? And yet, without philosophy, none of us can live. Not a single individual, not a single human being can live without some kind of philosophy of life. Only we don't call it as such. We have an implicit philosophy of life. And what does that mean? So the way we look at life in general, the assumptions with which we approach life. And without certain assumptions, one cannot simply live. One can't live a family life, one can't live a social life, one can't certainly live an economic life or a business life as well. There are certain assumptions, certain ways of looking at the world. And when you make them explicit, then we call that philosophy. Once Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, who was the philosopher, the first president of India, also a great philosopher, he once asked the question that, why is it that the highest degree in any subject, so you study any subject, whether it's law or music or economics or physics or chemistry, the highest degree that you get is not master's in chemistry or physics. It is a doctorate in philosophy, a PhD. A doctorate in philosophy, in chemistry, in physics, in biology. So he asked the question, why doctorate in philosophy? Why not a doctorate in music? Why not doctorate in biology? Why not doctorate in astronomy? Why a doctorate in philosophy in astronomy? A very valid question. And of course, there are two answers. One is a more literal one. After all, philosophy just means love of knowledge. That's the Latin origin of the word. So in that sense, but there was something else that he suggested. And he was absolutely right. He said, when you go deep into any subject, whether it's nuclear physics or economics, you reach an area, a zone, where you are confronted with fundamentals. And you can't get away from those fundamental questions. And whether it's physics or economics or psychology, often those are very elusive concepts. I mean, if you study nuclear physics, Professor Bala knows about this because he also knows about Buddhism and the view of shunyata and so on. When you actually look at energy and particles and atoms and what they're made up of, they almost disappear. Matter turns to energy, and energy turns into probability waves, and it's very difficult to get hold of them. One is reminded of the Indian notions of Maya, where appearances and realities may be different, and it's very difficult to grasp at reality because after all we know is appearances. I mean, all we know is from our five senses. But if you did the same exercise with economics, and I'm going to talk about economics and business in a moment, but if you did it with sociology, if you did it in any social science or art subject, you'd be ultimately confronted with human beings, because after all, human actors are what make up business life or economics or sociology or any social science discipline. So you'd have to inquire as to what their nature is. So if you go into physics and look at the nature of matter, it becomes a matter almost of philosophy, as all the fathers of quantum physics, including Schrodinger. Schrodinger wrote a book, the father of quantum mechanics wrote a book, What is Life? And he said once finally one looks at atoms and quantum physics, one is reminded of the Upanishads. So half the book of What is Life is quantum mechanics, the other is about quantum mechanics, about Vedanta. Or almost the imperceptible difference between consciousness and energy. But if you go to more concrete social science disciplines like economics and sociology, again, you'll be confronted with, okay, so these are human beings. So how do humans behave? What are they after? What are their major drives? Why do they engage in economic behavior? Why do they want to accumulate capital? Why do they want to become rich? Why is subsistence not good enough? How much money is enough? Should you look after your own satisfaction or to look after the satisfaction of your family? What is your notion of a family? A nuclear family, an extended family? Is the welfare of the children of your neighbor also a part of your utility calculus? So very soon you get into philosophical questions. Now here's the intriguing part. Although you can't get away from these disciplines, most of these disciplines simply ignore all these philosophical matters. You know, I was trained as an economist. I'm basically an economist who's now in a business school. And I studied economics at Delhi University. We used to study a book, which is still very popular, by a chap called Richard Lipsey, a famous economist. And the book was called An Introduction to Positive Economics. An Introduction to Positive Economics. Now, when it said positive, it didn't mean, contrary to negative economics. The very first page said there's a distinction between positive matters and normative matters. So there's positive economics and normative economics. So normative economics is about norms of behavior. Therefore, it's about culture. It's about, values, norms. He said this book will not touch upon normative aspects. We are scientists. This is economic science. We're not philosophers. We're not woolly-headed philosophers. Or you almost said so. We are scientists. So we study economics as a science. So we will study the positive aspects of economics. So all of this book is norm-free. It's value-free. It's culture-free. Therefore, it's called Introduction to Positive Economics. And most of economics till the day, whether they say it explicitly or not, believe in that paradigm, that economics and business and management, which are actually built on economics. Management and business are very recent disciplines. Economics is a far older discipline than business and management. And Kautilya in Arthashastra was writing about economics. The father, modern economics, Adam Smith, wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776. Management and business came much later. They're almost an American invention. So when the American corporations started becoming large, they said that, the family could not manage it on its own. So you needed some management administrators, hence the word MBA, Masters in Business Administration. In fact, places like Oxford and Cambridge resisted introduction to management schools until very recently. And even now they're treated as very second class. So in Oxford, there is the Side Business School, and Cambridge, there's the Judge Institute of Management Studies. They're not taken very seriously. There's no academic respectability. Economics is still taken more of a serious subject. Although John Maynard Keynes, in his famous book, said even economics is like dentistry. It's not like medicine. Economics, he said, is also a half discipline. And this comes from John Maynard Keynes. But if that's half discipline, you can imagine the status of business and management. But so if you go back to economics, on which management and business studies are based, in a sense, if you go back to economics, there are Nobel Prizes in economics. There are no Nobel Prizes in management or business studies. If you go to economics, economics pretends that we can do without culture. We can do without norms. We can do without values. We can do without any philosophical questions. We are a science. We are like physics. In physics, you don't need philosophy of the kind of, saying, because all particles in the world behave in one particular way. Matter does not have cultural aspects to it. Similarly, in chemistry, whether the atom is in India or sodium and potassium, you do an experiment in India, or you do it in Uganda or in the US, sodium and potassium behave similarly in either of those countries. So there is no cultural difference. And the economists claim that therefore their discipline is also a universal discipline. Economics is universal. It does not need to be modified to Indian conditions or to Western conditions or Uganda conditions. And they claim human beings behave in a uniform way, no matter where they live, just like atoms do, just like the elements and compounds of chemistry do. We behave in a homogeneous fashion right through the world. And therefore, we can build a universal science. And that's the dream of economics. Economics grew up in Europe, but then later in the US, because there's more money there, many academics went there. And so-called neoliberal economics, at least in the last century, essentially gained strength from the writings of American economists, although the Europeans were writing too. Now, is their claim true that economics is norm-free, philosophy-free, value-free, both in its underlying assumptions as well as its methodological approach? And the answer clearly is not. If I remember the Lipsey book, it begins by saying, okay, all human beings, they don't call them human beings, by the way, all economic agents. The word human being never appears in the economics textbook. All economic agents are utility maximizers. They maximize utility. And this comes from an old economist called Alfred Marshall. So utility maximizers, all right? What is utility? Utility is satisfaction. What are the components of utility? Where do human beings get the utility from? So Lipsey and all economists, even today, all microeconomics textbooks, those of you who study, teach management and economics would know this, whether it's the Henderson-Quant book they use now or whatever book they use. It says utility is a function of consumption of goods, which are products, goods and services. Utility function is function f of x1, x2, x3, whatever, where x1, x2, x3 are goods. They can be services, the products. Yes. The more you consume them, the higher your utility. Now, you may well want to ask, is this a normative utility function? Or is it a universal value-free utility function? An economics textbook will never use these terms. But if you think about it, look what has been said, that human beings are motivated only by, their happiness, utility, satisfaction, happiness, comes only from one thing in economics: consumption of goods. Consumption of goods. So it does not come from any other non-material sources. In the economist utility function, you do not get satisfaction from friendship, from looking after your parents or your neighbor's parents. It does not come from adherence to integrity or norms of honesty. It does not come from any of those so-called, what we call cultural values. It only comes from something very narrow, which is the consumption of material goods. Now, that clearly is a normative assumption. It's not norm-free. Although the book is called Positive Economics, it's a very normative assumption. It's full of norms. Bhutan, which has amongst the highest happiness indexes in the world, or for that matter, any of the Scandinavian countries. You go to Denmark, which again, this year, I think has the highest happiness index. They'd say, yeah, we get utility, some utility from consumption of goods, but we also get utility from the community. Good, harmonious relationship with the community, neighbors, children, and so forth. So it's not just a function of consumption of goods. There's another assumption in that utility function. The other assumption is it is an individual thing. It comes from my consumption of material goods. It does not even come from the consumption of material goods from my children. So utility is function of individual consumption. So if I'm the breadwinner and I get a certain amount of income, if you are believing in a strict utility function, if with that you buy a pizza, you get more happiness if you consume the pizza yourself than if you were to pass it on even to your own children, to your wife, your children, your grandchildren. That in economics is treated as altruism. They give it a term. You're no longer a utility maximizer. You're sacrificing utility by giving the pizza to your children or to somebody. You earned it, so So it is my individual consumption. Then I'm a utility maximizer. Now, if you ask normal people, yes, anybody, that look, you ask a mother, even a father, that look, if there's a limited piece of pizza and your child is demanding it and it won't do him harm or her harm, would you mind passing it on to the child? And if you do, is that a sacrifice or will your own utility be increased? I mean, when are you happier? If there's only one piece of pizza or one piece of chocolate, eating it yourself or giving it to your child, who therefore has a smile on the face. And if you can internalize that smile onto your own utility function, are you really sacrificing anything? Is that a notion of, is that altruism? Even birds, will protect their children. If a snake or an eagle tries to, peck at the eggs that the bird lays, it's springtime. If you notice in the garden, all birds are laying eggs, which will soon hatch. I was noticing in FMS garden a couple of days ago. And if somebody comes and attacks it, a bird of prey, the bird will defend it. Now, the bird can't speak, but I get the feel that although it may be genetically programmed, and the bird in no sense is being altruistic, it's maximizing its own utility. It feels a sense of commitment to its young ones. The young ones are a part of the bird. Which brings me to this question of what is the self? And I think Professor Bala would relate to this, because all of Buddhism is about the self. Is the self a relational concept? Let me repeat that. So in this book the latest book that I edited, Economic Theory and Policy Must Global This Content, we have the first chapter by a very famous economist from Pakistan, Akmal Hussain, very, very famous person. And it's full of Sufi poetry. And the first question he's asking, he's talking about, he starts with global warming and why global warming is going to kill us all, because we think it's somebody else's problem. In economics, we call it externality, something external to us. It's not part of our utility function. We have to be altruistic to deal with it. And that's where he begins. But then he asks a more fundamental question. He says, what does the self mean? What is selfishness? Is self a relational concept? Or is self my body? Or does self include my children, their happiness? When they're happy, am I happy? If I'm happy, is that being altruistic? Am I being selfish? I personally think, by the way, I look after street dogs in a very big way. So if you come to my house, it's full of street dogs. Is that being altruistic? Absolutely not. I think it gives me the greatest joy. In no sense is it a sense of sacrifice. It's just the way we look at the world. It's just the way we look at the world. So is self a relational concept? And if it is a relational concept, to what extent does it go? I mean, my children eat a chocolate, so I'm happy. What about my neighbor's children? What about the starving children in, say, Ethiopia? If I pass them, I send them a check. If I can afford to give some money to children in Somalia, is that being altruism? Or, well, those children, they may not be born from my flesh. They're children. The children like all the children of the world. So am I not supposed to be happy? Only children to whom I contribute my genetic material are my children, and only to them can I be happy? I mean, is it legitimate to be happy? But the economists would say, oh, all that is altruism. I mean, you're being irrational, literally. In economics, such behavior is called irrational behavior. In game theory, which is now the basis of microeconomics, even if you don't cheat, so the single shot prisoner's dilemma, I hope many people would be familiar, not just economists, but sociologists, political scientists, would be familiar with the prisoner's dilemma game, especially a single encounter game. So in a single encounter game, if you cheat on your opponent, right, then it benefits you. If you are honest and the other guy cheats, you get exploited. If both cheat, of course, you're both worse off than if you were both honest. And that's why it's called a prisoner's dilemma game. Now, the Nash equilibrium, after the famous John Nash, says the rational outcome of a prisoner's dilemma game is everybody cheats because you can't trust the other. One, you're afraid that he'll be selfish. Number two, even if you trust the guy is going to be selfless, then you're afraid, or you'd say, why not exploit the other guy? I mean, It'd be stupid. The guy is trusting me. Let me exploit him, and therefore let me maximize my own utility. So the Nash equilibrium solution of a single shot prisoner's dilemma game is both cheat. Everybody cheats, and you end up with an inferior outcome than if everybody had cooperated. That's a standard simple. I hope many of you are familiar with that Nash equilibrium game. And they say, if you're honest, even if you expect the other guy to be honest, if you're honest, you are being irrational. You are being irrational. So cheating is rational. For economists, a cheater is a rational human being. Because for an economist, what is rationality? The maximization of individual utility, which comes from consumption of material goods. The rest be damned. Altruism is an aberration. Now, what on earth, what kind of definition of rationality is this? The Buddha would not turn in his grave because we didn't bury him. So, but wherever his ashes are, if they are in the Ganga, they might certainly turn. Imagine, this is what's taught to every single person in every single business school right across the world, that rationality means in a prisoner's dilemma, cheat on the other guy. There is a famous paper which appeared about 15 years earlier, 10 years earlier. Why do economists lie more? L-I-E. Why do economists lie more? So they did an experiment. It's a very interesting experiment. They did a simple game theory experiment, and we got people to play this single shot prisoner's dilemma game in students of various disciplines. So economics was one, management was another, law was another, English literature, there were liberal arts, and they also did it across countries. So they did it in Spain and they did it in other countries. And they said this cheating behavior, which is predicted by economists who claim people should be rational, what happens when you play this game cross-culturally and cross-discipline-wise? And I'm not surprised by the results, but some people are. So they found the maximum cheating takes place when students in economics, management play those games. But it's still less than people in law. So the worst offenders are lawyers. Okay? Because after all, in law, I mean, you by hook or crook, you're supposed to, defend your defendant. And India, of course, the less said the better. You can do witness tampering and so forth, which is considered legitimate. But even in the West, so the worst offenders were law. Everybody believed it was right to cheat. Economists and management people were next. Because after all, we teach them it's rational. So they picked that up. Then the people who hardly cheated or cheated to a much lower degree were people who had studied English or any languages, liberal arts or philosophy, any liberal arts people. But presumably, when I was just listening into the last part of the discussion we were having in your last session, listening to the words of Tolstoy and Thoreau and so on. So obviously somebody who's read some of the fine literature of the world will be more sensitive, and you'd wonder whether the rational thing to do is to cheat, because after all, cheating leads to a collective outcome which is far worse than if everybody had not cheated. Yes, the collective outcome is worse. So in what sense is it rational anyway? But that's news to people in economics. So people in the liberal arts cheated far less. Now, when you looked across cultures, again, there were differences. So some countries where there's a greater degree of trust, like in Scandinavian countries, in that single shot game, people cheated less because those societies are built on trust. And therefore, those societies, Scandinavia is amongst the lowest rates of crime in the world, violent crime in the world. Japan, again, is like that. Bhutan, again, is like that. It's to do with the philosophical outlook of people in those countries. People where you think, countries where you think everybody has a right to only maximize his own utility and the rest be damned, things get worse. I mean, we have seen the horrendous events that unfolded after Trump was ousted out of power. We saw people storming the Capitol of the United States, waving flags. Confederacy flags, which were defenders of slavery before the Civil War in the US. And those flags were taken to the Capitol. And one of those people, you might have seen the footage, who was carrying that flag and who believed, by the way, he was doing the right thing, went up to the podium and read out this entire the prayer, "In God we trust, in the Constitution of the US we trust," and he thought he was doing the right thing. One cannot escape from philosophy. But if you had asked this person, "Are you a philosopher, sir? You know, this chap who stormed the Capitol, are you a philosopher? Have you ever read any, do you believe in any philosophical views about life?" He would laugh. But all of us have a way of looking at life. So back to economics and management. The situation is very, very, very dismal. John Maynard Keynes called economics a dismal science, and it is truly dismal. But sociology, I think, is not much better these days, nor are most social science disciplines. We just have to confront, we have to take the bull by its horn. If you look at India today, what do we teach our children? Forget management. What do we teach our children? Now, the fact that we are secular, and I'm grateful we are secular, but we are so afraid of hurting religious sensitivities, because after all, religions can vary and have their own norms, that therefore we have decided in India, maybe with some wisdom, practical wisdom, perhaps, because we're not mature enough to do otherwise, we won't teach any religion. So, unless it's a missionary school or of a religious minority, we don't teach people any religion. We don't teach them Gita or Quran or Quran Sahib, nothing. You can test it with your own students. I've done it many times in FMS. I ask people, how many of you read any religious text? Have you read the Gita? Have you seen the Gita? Looked at it? Have you seen the Upanishads? Do you know how big the volume is? Do you know how many Upanishads there are? Can you give me the names of 3? Yeah. Have you seen the Guru Granth Sahib? Have you seen, any Sufi poetry by any of the great Persian masters? The question is not agreement or disagreement. The question is exposure. Most people haven't. Have you read the Greek philosophers? Have you read the Republic? Have you read any Socrates? Do you know anything about the 6 schools of Indian philosophy? Most Indians wouldn't know what you're talking about. What are the 6 schools of Indian philosophy? Can you name them? Yes. What's the difference between Dvait and Advait? Those are philosophy. Not a clue. So the problem is that if we do not even expose people to multiple ways of looking at the world, and then our social science subjects pretend that philosophy, culture do not matter. All that matters is utility maximization. What is utility maximization? Consume material goods as much as you can. There's no limit. Gandhi used to say, there's enough in the world for everybody's need, but not for everybody's greed. But in economics, that's not true. In economics, there's no end to getting rich. So the US, is US a rich enough country? I would say yes. But there's no notion of reasonable sufficiency in economics. No notion of reasonable sufficiency. No distinction between need and greed. So the moment the economy becomes stationary, we say, oh my God, there's a recession. How many clothes do you want? How much food can you eat? So this notion of the quality matters more than quantity. That after a while, these things really don't matter. They only add to your waistline. If you eat more than 2,000 calories, you have to go to the gym, or you get heart attacks, and then you get medical tourism, of course. What do you need in life, for God's sake? Can't we have a discussion on it? Our planet is melting. There's global warming. Today, last year, if you remember, Australia was ravaged by fire. There were forest fires all over Australia. This year, there's floods. Sydney is flooded. And these are exactly the predictions of global warming. Now, if we pretend we can get away from global warming just by, having more hydroelectric plants and more renewable source of energy, we are dreaming. That's a pipe dream. Unless we cut down our consumption, unless we make, life choices which are sustainable with My brother lives in Amsterdam, and whenever I go to Amsterdam, the first thing I see, everybody is on a bicycle. Everybody is on a bicycle. In India, you ask a chief executive officer, go to pick up a bicycle, and he won't. He wants to have his latest, biggest car. And then you will have odd days and even days. All this is philosophy. It's the way we look at the world. We look at the planet. We look at economics. We look at management. We look at how we talk to each other. The NEP, the last seminar, as Nidhi was reminding me, I was saying the same thing. What is education, for God's sake? It's okay, 3 years, 4 years, all that is fine. But that's really, those are details. What is education? Krishnamurti, Jiddu Krishnamurti, one of the great philosophers of India, although he would say, I'm not a philosopher, I'm a seeker of the truth, or a seer of the truth. Krishnamurti defined education as the following. He said, education is the attempt to awaken human intelligence so that it flowers in goodness. Let me say that again. Education is the attempt to awaken human intelligence so that it flowers in goodness. In other words, education is not just imparting of knowledge, facts, which is how education is in most parts of the world. You teach people facts, they memorize it, you test for their memory. Now, certain amount of memory is important, I guess, certain amount of facts need to be known. But the acquisition of the facts, is it through a memory route or is it through an exploration route of experimenting, testing, finding out for yourself? That's one. Number two, can you question received wisdom, the assumptions, especially in social sciences? Can you question them? Can you question the notion of altruism or self, or how much money is enough, or what leads to global warming, or what about the institution of marriage in modern times? I mean, can you question all those things, right? Notions of gender equality. So if both husband and wife are going to work today, as most people in FMS are, students are, who is going to look after children? Because the grandparents, I grew up with my grandparents, but grandparents may be away in a different city. Now, if leave has to be taken, shouldn't the father take as much leave as the mother? Shouldn't the paternity leave be as much as the maternity leave? And would companies allow their male employees, take a year's break without damaging their careers? Now, it depends on the outlook towards management. What does the CEO think? That his employees should only maximize profits, or should they have happy lives and raise children who have been loved, who have not been neglected, because both husband and wife have been working till 12 o'clock at night, maximizing the bottom line of companies? So these are big questions. Normally, these philosophical questions are addressed through dramatics, through novels, through newspaper columns, the institutions of culture. And that is where I really am saddened these days. If you pick, I sometimes hanker after Doordarshan days. They were black and white, but we still look forward to Chitrahar. We still look forward to the Sunday film. We still had Krishi Darshan, so at least you saw the farmer, not just protesting on the streets of Delhi, outside Delhi, but you saw the farmer regularly. They were black and white, never mind. They were not 100 channels. You can flip channels today from one channel to another. Most news is fake. There's very serious, or despite all these brainstorming sessions they seem to have, there's very little deep content in anything. There's hardly any, how many people in Delhi go and see drama? So philosophy, I think the Indians got it right. The early Indians, they never made a distinction between philosophy and living and Hinduism and religion. I mean, they said everything is one seamless whole. You can't divide up these things. Otherwise, you'll have schizophrenic individuals and schizophrenic societies. But it has to start happening from the educational institutions. Otherwise, the only message you get is from the commercial advertisements. Whether you're watching the IPL or you're watching a movie, after every 5 minutes, you'll get a commercial message, which is what sustains the news channels. Those ads sustain your Netflixes of the world or whatever, although Netflix at the moment is ad free. But ultimately, everything is supported by the commercial business activity in the ads. And the message is buy more, you'll be happy. Those of you who've seen a Pantene ad, because you're worth it. So if you can afford a shampoo, which is priced over the head of most Indians, only then you're worth it. Otherwise, you're not. Or the famous Shah Rukh Khan ad, don't be santusht. I don't know what Buddha would have said to that. Don't be santusht. Because the very first truth, the first truth of the Buddhist noble truth is there's suffering in the world, but the second truth is the suffering has a cause, which is craving, insatiable craving. Shah Rukh Khan saying, don't be santusht. So these are philosophical questions. You can't get away from philosophy. We have a long way to go. In fact, we have a way to start. I hope with the new NEP, whenever that happens, in whatever form it happens, and I don't think 3 or 4 year old that is that critical, frankly, on how many exams you do. What really matters is whether you can awaken human intelligence so that it flowers in goodness, so that we are happy, like we have happy individuals. I have done a lot of work with the Dalai Lama. Invited him when I was being planning or vice chancellor. Many times I invited him to university. Some of you might have attended those functions. Once I remember we had a whole 2-day function at the university with teachers and students invited from all colleges. And the topic of that 2-day event, which is on YouTube, by the way, it was called What is Life All About? What is life all about? And all students and the teachers from all the colleges asked the Dalai Lama various questions on everything, from sexuality to marriage to how much money is enough. And the Dalai Lama gave answers which are commonsensical, but common sense is deeply uncommon these days. I think common sense is a misnomer. If there was more common sense, which should be common, then the world would be a very different place. So we have a long way to go. The love of philosophy, which is the love of inquiry, as Socrates would put it, curious attitude. I don't know what you know about your students, what do you think about your students. When I talk to my students these days, I get sometimes very, very, very dismayed. There seems to be a lack of passion. Maybe this young generation, of course, every generation thinks that the young generation is queer. I used to think about that, about my parents. But maybe they're getting so much exposure early on, and so many things which we took for granted are available so quickly, that so many of them seem to get bored very quickly. Also, there's a huge attention deficit disorder because of all the social media and all the mobile devices. I'm amongst the few people in the world which actually don't keep a mobile phone. I've now been forced to keep one in COVID times because I'm dean, but I'll give it up the moment this is over. I just can't cope. I've never kept one mobile. Even when Vice Chancellor, I didn't have a cell phone. I can't cope with this constant bombardment of mental stimuli. But what's happening as a result of all this, what I call frivolous stimuli, whether it's on Facebook or Instagram or God knows what else there is, that we have sacrificed depth for breadth. That's happened also on TV channels. 200 channels, nothing to watch. So much content, but very less deep content. So frivolousness, gloss, the superficial, often branded by companies for making money, has taken over. But the deep questions of life, which are the simple questions of life, which are the fundamental questions of life. What is life about? What is happiness about? And it's very simple, frankly. You don't need much to eat. You don't need many clothes, but you do need harmonious relationships. You do need some activity which is stimulating to you. So if you like painting, paint. If you like mathematics, join a career which uses mathematics. Otherwise, all this hyper competition and this constant running about leads nowhere. I'll end with 2 quotes. One from Dalai Lama, who often says that if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want yourself to be happy, practice compassion. I don't know what the economists would think of that utility function. If you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want yourself to be happy, practice compassion. Economics and management is full of the word passion, especially in management. Have passion, passion. Nobody talks about compassion. The word compassion means passion with, the word companion. So passion for all is compassion. Compassion, passion is a subset of compassion, the word. Passion for all. If it's just passion for your narrowly construed notion of self, limited to your mental thoughts and body, then that's passion. If it's more broad-based, it's compassion. So both are passion. And that reminds me of a quote by Ghalib, which is both passion and incompassion. And I'm sure most of you have heard this. It goes like, रगों में दौड़ते फिरने के हम नहीं कायल, आंख से जो टपका ही नहीं वो लहू क्या है, रगों में दौड़ते फिरने के हम नहीं कायल. I'm not enamored by blood flowing about in my veins and arteries, running about. That's no big deal. रगों में दौड़ते फिरने के हम नहीं कायल, आंख से जो टपका ही नहीं वो लहू क्या है. Unless I can cry tears of blood for compassion for others and try and help out, then what is blood for and what is my life for? What is living for? So that is both passion and that's both compassion. I don't think there's a distinction. There's no distinction between the self and altruism. And if you make a distinction, you will get global warming. And then we'll all collectively commit suicide, but we'll sing along the way. So I think that's all I need to say. I've deliberately kept it a bit non-structured so that I can provoke you into thinking, which is the purpose of, you can't do more than an hour. And maybe we can take some questions on this if you wish.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And we'll go on.
It was really very structured lecture, sir. And it was very lively as well, sir. So if participants are having, yes, one question from Vasudha.
Go on, Vasudha.
Vasudha, you can speak.
Yes, I'm trying to unmute myself. Am I audible?
Yeah, I'm audible.
Okay. So, sir, many thanks for this excellent presentation. You have echoed much of my own views also, but in obviously a much more systematic manner. So I have two questions. So when we talk about economics, essentially what you have described here is a liberal view of economics. And I would be more interested to understand the alternatives that are available to us, because when we talk about economics and philosophy in the same breath, then I would also like to look at materialism and its alternatives. You've spoken about overconsumption and so on and so forth. Are the alternatives that we can think of? Maybe it could be a Gandhian way, maybe it could be a Buddhist way. Yesterday we were talking about looking inwards and self-introspection and relying on religious texts and scriptures for guidance and so on. But those alternatives seem to be on the margins and not very, I would say, popular. So in that sense, what is the alternative for us in our individual and collective philosophies? And my second question is, sir, that since I teach political science, so I cannot help but wonder that when economics and politics get enmeshed and they get so tightly linked together that the state itself co-opts this neoliberal ideology and the interests of the private sector, so to say, and the state starts moving away from community-based social welfare policies and starts adopting, let's say, policies and bills, which we can also see in the present day Indian political scenario, then where is the scope of alternatives? And if back in 1980s, at the turn of the end of the Cold War, there was a saying, a phrase which was coined, TINA, Tina syndrome, which means there is no alternative to neoliberalism. And US became the hegemonic state, and it was seen as the disintegration of USSR was seen as the triumph of not just USA, but also the victory of liberalism over all the alternative philosophies and ideologies. So where does the state stand in today's national and global politics? Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Vasudha. So let's take both those questions in turn. So the first one, economics. So you're right. What I was largely talking about is what is called neoliberal economics. The problem is that economics split into neoliberal and then for a long while into Marxist economics. And then on Marxist economics, then the Soviet experiment was built, which was that the markets, because Karl Marx had said in his Das Kapital that he predicted that as capital becomes larger, the proletariat will become poorer, and unless therefore you socialize the means of production, there will never be equality. Therefore, there you had the socialist revolution, the Bolshevik revolution in the USSR. After that, you had the revolution in China. China is still ruled, ironically, by the Chinese Communist Party, and we'll say perhaps a little about it later. And then the East European countries also adopted that one way or the other. And then, as you know, the whole thing collapsed for whatever reason. We won't go into that for the moment. They achieved many things, and they also failed in many ways. And then, as you're right, as you were saying, it was treated as a victory of neoliberal economics, and those methods had failed. But one thing that in practice, although Karl Marx, if you read him as a philosopher, very few people have read Karl Marx because his writings are so voluminous. So he's not just a political philosopher, he's also a philosopher. And if you read Erich Fromm, which I think is a person who understands Marx very well, Marx was also a humanist. But the way that the Soviet Union imbibed his work was to dehumanize. Stalin, executed millions of landlords and sent off people to Siberia because he said that unless you do away with the property class, they'll capture power again. Gandhi refused to do that. He said, Vinod Bhave, who started the Bhumidan movement, he said, yes, you must distribute assets more equally, but we will not do it through violence, because violence breeds violence. But the Soviets took a very different view. They said, in a sense, the goals are more important than the means. That was not true for Gandhi, but it was true for them, that you have to be practical. Otherwise, you cannot dislodge capitalism. So you'll have to have a violent revolution if need be. And that's what happened in China as well. And the problem with those views, of course, is that one, Marxist philosophy that was actually practiced in these countries also was a materialist philosophy. They also treated, you could do it, you could produce goods through centrally owned organs rather than through the market. But what ultimately mattered still was consumption of goods. People's character, their proclivities towards integrity, honesty, the value of freedom, individual freedom, that was not a part of the utility function. Even for them, it was consumption of goods. The only thing was consumption could be better provided and distribution could be better provided, as they claimed, through the state, and centrally owned enterprises rather than to the market. And then, you know, the whole experiment, how it fared, succeeded in some ways, failed in some ways. Then yes, the dominance of the Washington consensus, the growth of the IMF, and all that stuff. So we can't go into that. Now, the heterodox stuff, you were saying. So the heterodox Gandhian economics, Buddhist economics. So my favorite, all-time favorite book in economics and social sciences is a book some of you might have read. Otherwise, I encourage you to read it. It's called Small is Beautiful. And the subtitle of the book is Economics as if People Mattered. Small is Beautiful, subtitle, Economics as if People Mattered by Shoemaker, written in the early 70s. It's a classic. It's a worldwide recognized classic, but unfortunately, nobody follows advice. And this guy was asking in 70s, he was pointing out not just to the environment and global warming and depletion of resources. There's a chapter there called Buddhist economics. There's an actual chapter called Buddhist economics. But it's not just Buddhist. What he's really saying is, do goods matter or people matter? Who comes first? Is it goods or is it people? That's why there's subtitle, Economics as if People Mattered. Are markets important? Or the people that markets are supposed to serve? Right? So the question he was asking, how much do you need? And he was saying, and this is again neglected, both in economics and management school today and in normal discourse. What we talk about consumer. What about the producer? Most of our time in life is spent not in a role of a consumer. That we do when we get back home. Most of our life is spent as a producer. So I'm here in FMS. The best part of a productive day or yours would be in whatever occupation you are. You are a producer at that point. Are you happy as a producer? Are you working in a sweatshop in Bangladesh? So, or you're making iPads in China. iPads, outsourced. iPhones or outsourced to Foxconn in China. And people work there for 12-hour shifts. Yes. Or in call centers in India, where you wake up all nights. So as a producer, you have a miserable life. There's a division of labor which dehumanizes work, takes away all creativity, puts you on an assembly line. And those of you who've read The Brave New World by Aldous Huxley would know what I'm talking about. So activities for the sake of efficiency are broken down into smaller and smaller bits. I often ask my students, suppose, FMS students get paid a lot of money and far beyond what they actually deserve, frankly, or any management school deserve. I think it's fairly ridiculous what the IIMs and FMS offer to youngsters. It spoils them. That's my personal view. But I often ask them, suppose I put you on an assembly shop floor instead of being a manager, and all your life, for the next 30 years, you have to work on an assembly line, move one lever in a one way, or screw or unscrew a bolt. And that's all you do all day. And I give you more income than what you learn out of FMS management jobs. I even double it. Will you do it? Will you spend all your life on an assembly line, even at night? I mean, those of you who've seen a Charlie Chaplin movie called Modern Times, or if you've actually been to assembly floor, would you do it? And people start thinking. So it's not just money, it's what you do. Is it a productive job? Is it a creative job? And that discourse has just gone out. It's all about consumption, as if consumption was be all and end all. And very quickly, the last question, Tina factor, there is no alternative. Yeah, there are lots of alternatives. We just don't want to think about it. It's fatalism. There are no easy answers, that's for sure. But good things are never easy. When the Indian freedom movement took place, if the Indian freedom fighters had said there's no alternative, I mean, look at the British Raj. If Gandhi had said this, look at the power of these guys. Who are we? How are we going to take on an empire where the sun never sets? There is no alternative. Gandhi said sorry. I mean, he was thrown out of that train, first class compartment in Britain. He didn't say, oh, there's no alternative. Let me reconcile to it. And we got our freedom. So, but that requires courage and sacrifice. So there are always alternatives. The question is, do we have it in us? As in Hamlet, or was it Julius Caesar? Julius Caesar. The fault lies not in our stars, but in us, that we're underlings. So, but it's hard. It's tough. Thank you, Vasudha.
Sir, any more participants are having any doubts or questions or queries? Please raise your hand. If the participants are having any questions or doubts, please raise your hands. I think no more doubts because your lecture was so lively and beautiful, sir. It was a very
comprehensive.
Okay. One
Vasudha.
question.
Yes.
Vasudha. Okay, Vasudha, you can
speak.
Sir,
Yes, thank you so much for responding to my queries. So I completely agree with you that there are alternatives and they only need intent to be pursued. And however, what I also see is that because of the forces of globalization, we see that the force of globalization is probably so strong that we don't talk about alternatives anymore. And we are made to believe that this is the only way forward. I do know that there are social movements, there are deglobalization movements and anti-globalization movements also. But given that there is imposition of, say, one size fits all policy, therefore we are not able to probably go as much fast in opposing and resisting globalization, the neoliberal variety of globalization, probably, as we should. And my follow-up question to you, sir, is that Michael Walzer talks about assigning these Michael Walzer says that all these primary goods have social meaning attached to them. So what we mean by, the utility theory in political science, the utilitarians are not very favored or popular, but Michael Walzer also says that, look at education for that matter, or look at the whole value attached to education or even to leisure. How many Indians, or if we do a comparative study between, say, Americans and Indians, how many Americans would attach value to leisure in the same way as they attach social meaning and value to hard work? In the West, it would be considered, both are equal. Hard work is also important, and so is leisure. And if you go to Denmark, their idea of happiness is very different from our idea of happiness. They would prefer candles and coffee and rain and pick up a book, what they call the hygge factor. Same thing is with the Bhutanese. But for us, happiness means shopping in a mall and accumulating, like you said. So there are social meanings and cultural context to the primary goods, and that cannot be, probably in the liberal economic theory, they are not considered. And probably that's why there is a one size fits all policy and globalization is coming down on us. So thank you with that.
Would I like to say that we Indian academics are lazy bums. And we blame, I agree with everything you said, but the blame lies with us. We accept what the West tells us. Tagore was an internationalist. He was not a parochial guy. But when he set up Shanti Niketan, and if you read, his essay on the founding of Shanti Niketan, it's called Eastern University, that essay. And he says, I'm going to combine the best of the West and the best of the East. So I'm going to teach science, but I'm also going to teach Indian arts and Indian music. I'm going to teach them the Upanishads. I'll also teach them Plato and Socrates, and certainly modern science. With us Indian intelligentsia, and I don't know whether there's any left, frankly, or in our Indian universities, all of us, I think we're all hopeless, we're pathetic, we ought to be thrown out. What efforts do we take in our business teaching, in our political science teaching, in our sociology teaching, to really raise these philosophical, cultural questions. I mean, in this country, you still have the caste system. You still have gender issues. The Buddha fought against the caste in 600 BC. So what are we training our children? What kind, and what about theory? Forget practice. John Maynard Keynes was very right in his book. He said, it's not power that really matters. It's the power of ideas. So where are our ideas? Where are our think tanks? Where is the think tank Delhi University? Tell me. Where are the thinkers? Is there a lively discussion that we're doing in Delhi University over the direction in which country should be going, or on global warming? Is there a big thing that we're talking about? Global warming will kill us all. It will. Is there a big movement in Delhi University which we're talking in coffee shops and agonizing over it and having great discussions? None. We are all now captured by get a house, get a car, get your promotion, which are all okay. But I mean, is that it? So I think Indian intellectuals, Delhi University intellectuals, we need to pull up our socks. That includes me. I'm not blaming. The blame starts with me. The question is, what are we doing with our own children, with our own classes, with our own in our own institutions? Do we have a lively intellectual discussion going on basic issues? Sure, there are global forces, but all change begins at home. All charity begins at home. And theory, not just practice. Even theoretically, we are very, very lazy. So I hope we have now the confidence. Unless when a country loses its confidence, it loses its soul. As Gandhi used to say, I'm happy for all the windows of my house to remain open, so the winds of the world can enter my house, but I will not open the doors that I be blown away. So symbolism is fine. You can build all the temples and you can have all the the Hajj, and you can all have the Kumbh Melas and so forth. But that's just ritual. When it comes to actual behavior, what shakes our bones and moves our blood, I think we are very, very anemic. We are very weak intellectuals, very feeble. So call for arms, call to arms. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. So any more question? I think
there is another question. I think there is a lady.
K. Srinivas, I think.
Actually, I had a question, but sir walked us through the answer. I was just wondering the same, sir. With all your intelligence and the way you brought out with the Ghalib's saying and the anecdotes that you mentioned through your lecture was phenomenal, sir. I was just wondering what is stopping us in academia in bridging these gaps that we find is there within our subjects. I remember teaching Indian political thought, Indian philosophical thought in management studies. And believe me, sir, after a few years, this subject just got vanished from management studies. Why? What for? We don't know. So again, I think so it's high time that we bring in our philosophical underpinnings and theoretical, conceptual, these bridging gaps that can probably take us miles away. Very well thought, sir, paper, and the way you delivered and presented impeccably. Thank you very much for this session. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Kamala. I think what's happened is we're becoming globally less and less intelligent. It's strange. It's what the French call becoming nouveau rich. As if we've never seen wealth before. So all the glitter has blinded us. All the if you look at the British, I lived in Britain for 15 years and I used to marvel at the amount of beer they drink. I mean, the British are known for drunkenness. I mean, you see that in football hooliganism and so on. I mean, they treat as if they've never seen alcohol in their lives. So if you go to a Friday or a pub in Britain, I mean, the cultural norm is get drunk until you drop dead. By the way, that's happening in India today. My FMS students will tell you about the parties, and I live in Punjabi Bagh Club Road. which is the wild west of Delhi, full of, you know, such pubs and hookah bars. And, Lord knows what they're up to. The subtle things of life, the quality, not the quantity, the quality, subtle things of life, which gives us joy, the aesthetics, those are finer things. They're not necessarily concrete. They're the finer things of life. And if we get swayed by superficial glitter, you open a Yahoo homepage, I'm still on to Yahoo Mail, and I open the first page, it's all of celebrity news. Where Kareena Kaif went yesterday, or whoever that lady is, what party she went to. The whole page. I mean, the country is dying. You have a second COVID wave. And all that matters is which Bollywood star or which cricket star went partying where. Who cares? But everybody does, apparently. That's all. If you want to see how a country culturally is, philosophically is, look at what it's seeing. Look at the social media content. Look at the TRP ratings. Where are we headed, for God's sake? And as intellectuals, what are we up to? So the NEP, those of you who've seen the structure, and God, Lord knows what will happen to all that. But if you've seen the structure of the course that we propose for the undergraduate program, there's a paper on social emotional learning, where we hope, and it's called interdisciplinary. I hope we don't teach anything. We just let children talk, and we listen and we participate. And there's a paper called Ethics and Culture. Again, I hope interdisciplinary, where philosophers contribute, psychologists, literature people, music. For the first time, we have a credit paper called co-curricular activities, where you can do gardening or music or dance or rock climbing or what have you, and you'll be, you'll get marks for it like everybody else. So the whole idea. Then there are two research papers. One is on research on your major paper. One, an interdisciplinary research on your major and minor. Okay, so suppose that you are doing economics, that your minor is say philosophy or psychology or sociology. So that dissertation will be interdisciplinary. It will be marked by an economist from your college and from a political scientist or a sociologist. It will be supervised by two people. So I hope that will force us to look at our methodological and philosophical questions, because when two disciplines come together, then you have to confront some of these issues. You can't be in your need boxes of, unspoken assumptions. So, yeah, I think, look, unless we do something at an educational level, there's no hope in hell. So I'm hoping that, there can be a renaissance in Delhi University. I mean, promotions are fine, and I'm finding that happening, and I'm glad. But, we really need to recommit ourselves to, education, like medicine, is a vocation. It's not a profession. They used to say there are professions, there are vocations. And vocations were education, being a teacher, being a religious person, being a politician, and being a doctor. There are only 4 vocations. Everything else was a profession. And we are fundamental. So I think it's time to take our responsibility. Professor Bala, are you there? Can we have a quick word with you? I mean, I had this brilliant, I'm here because of him. He invited me.
I'm very much here, Professor.
So, we had that brilliant discussion. Professor Bala had come over to FMS, and Professor, then Dean Sunita had called him over. It was on the Open University in United Kingdom, they had come here, and we had, there was a brilliant interaction there. So again, I've been requesting him that, he's now the head of philosophy, and I'm looking at FMS for the moment. So, again, do something which brings management into philosophy and philosophy into management, and more yours into ours, run the other way around. There's already too much of business in the whole world. But the general idea that is that unless, I'm glad this is happening, unless these things are made explicit, we are killed by the implicit, which is what Freud said. The whole business of unconscious ruling our life, childhood traumas ruling our life till death points. So unless you make something conscious, your assumptions are becoming made conscious, then philosophy remains abstract. It moves you all the time, but without you knowing it. So I think it's time to say philosophy is not abstract. Philosophy is very concrete, and it's life and death. But do it in a way that people don't get scared of the term. But some thoughts, I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah. In fact, that's what we are trying to do now. Like in order to bring philosophy into the public epistemology, something that is very important for philosophy academia to do is reach out to the non-academic domain and tell the people that this is philosophy. It's not that something, that's why in the beginning itself yesterday, in the inaugural session, I was mentioning this. People tend to say, people have a large misunderstanding regarding philosophy, thinking that it is either religious or not related to this world at all. Both of them are absolutely wrong. And the actual fact lies in between these two. So that's where we faltered. And one of the blames should have, blame has to be rooted in the way academia has dealt with philosophy. So that's where the change has to come, and we are hoping that this change will come. And I absolutely I agree with you, and I also look forward to collaborations and dealing philosophy in a concrete way by relating it to management and economics.
Bala, one thing that has happened, plagued both philosophy and economics, is that we became technical subjects using technical language, and therefore became a closed group. In economics, if you went to Delhi School of Economics, most people won't even understand what they're talking about because all mathematics. In philosophy, and I understand why you need to speak about Hegelian dialectics or what Schopenhauer was saying, so forth. But the problem is that sometimes they become closed loops. So you start using technical language, which is what the point Buddha was making. That the Upanishads and the Brahmins was speaking in Sanskrit, and therefore the common people were cut off. And therefore he wrote in Pali. So what I'm saying is, unless philosophy is made accessible to everyone in a language which is approachable by everyone, even though it may use concepts which come from wherever, but not in a simplistic way. Not reducing its nuance, yet being simple, which is a major challenge, by the way. So
yeah, absolutely. I strongly disagree with the view that everything is philosophy kind of a perspective, where it again reaches non-existence or completely limiting it to academic pursuits, and saying that this is what is being done in the academic departments is only philosophy. So I completely disagree with these two extreme standpoints, and that's where remaining actual contributions to philosophy happen. So that's what is to be explored. And I'm glad to hear Dr. Kamala Srinivas also talking about this and saying that she taught it. She taught philosophical foundations of management, etc. Probably some of us have to get together and have a discussion on it and take it further. And I look forward to such kind of an opportunity, and we'll definitely explore such opportunities, Professor Vivek. I'm glad that you joined us and gave a wonderful talk. Thank you so much for being present with us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
I think there are some more questions, I believe. Ravneet ji.
Ravneet Kaur and Mohammad Irshad.
Yeah.
Fire away.
Yeah, Ravneet ji, please.
Mohammad Irshad, you can ask.
Probably you open your cameras and ask so that it would be nice.
Yeah. ये भी methodological question है कि कैमरा से अलग बात होती है, बात से अलग.
Mohammad Irshad is he is back. Mohammad Irshad, you are not audible.
Irshad, you are not audible.
You are not audible.
Increase the volume somewhere.
Mute होगा.
No, I have unmuted him.
You are still not audible.
You are not audible.
Maybe he can send a question on the chat. We can ask him.
You can write in the chat box, Mohammad Irshad, if it is not possible to come on audio. So we have one more question from Ravneet Kaur.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, we can take this question.
Sure.
Hello. Am I unmute now?
Yeah, you are audible.
Okay. So, I mean, it's not particularly a question, but just a comment on whatever we were just having discussion on, and especially when Bala sir and Vivek sir were having a discussion. When Vivek sir, just, pointed out how do we basically make philosophy less technical and, make it understand to people. What I was thinking was actually, it reminded me of one of my teachers, in first year of graduation. I did my English literature from DU, and one of my teachers, when he was teaching us basically ontology in the class, we hardly knew what ontology is basically. And we realized much later when I came to masters and I was given books on literary theory, that that particular teacher was actually doing ontology in the class, or per se phenomenology in the class, or hermeneutics in the class. So I mean to say that this kind of education starts right from the classroom, where we have students of early age with us. And the first thing is to basically uh, have make our students thinking subject, you know in a way, to make them thinkers. To be a philosopher is to be a thinker basically. And what we are basically doing right now is making parrots, rather than making them think. When I yeah and I was trying to do that in my teaching in last few years, as in how do I make my students think. That was the basic thing that I think we should start with. When sir was mentioning about uh, living standards, and we were comparing to foreign countries and Indian society, then again what I have noticed is that whenever we talk about public welfare and any kind of management which is to do with individuals upgradation of quality, then either we are called leftist, or we are given some terms for that, and we are degraded on those issues. So the very idea of public welfare and upgrading individuals quality of life is not being very political. It's philosophic by its virtue. If you do not like you see, like Carl Sagan said in his book Cosmos, Carl Sagan, the philosopher scientist, that although there is a lot of intelligence in the society, but the problem is that we do not propagate intelligence. And this propagate not to propagate intelligence comes from the fact of censorship. We censor thinking. There is censorship on thinking. There is a control on thinking. So if we actually promote thinking in different retrospects, whether it's classroom or whether it's public discussion of some kind, then probably we will be able to sort of preserve intelligence for the generations to come. Then we will not be, I mean, there are times in different points of civilization when there was there were times when intelligence was propagating, but it was stopped by something or the other, some situation or the other, which was more related to, let's say, debarring or controlling intelligence in some way in the society. So I don't know whether I'm making a lot of sense or not. I was just trying to connect the dots that you all were discussing. Yeah. Thanks so much for your
No, thank you. Those are all very valuable points. I mean, if you ask most people in the world, including academics anywhere, the difference between, say, ontology and epistemology, most of them would struggle, even if they've heard of the term. It's not, and as you said, although the teacher tried to explain it to you, you really never understood it. So these things need work. They need to be put in a way that people understand, and then you use those terms, you deliberate on them so that they become second nature. And if you don't do that, then it won't happen. They just remain something you talked about. It's not internalized. And most people are, by the way, never exposed to these things. We don't teach any of this. What's the difference between ontology and epistemology? Most people wouldn't know. They've never been trained. They've never been asked. So that's one. The other thing about the more broad point about thinking. Yeah, I mean, that's why I said Krishnamurti says education is the attempt to awaken human intelligence so that it flowers in goodness. But awaken human intelligence. The Buddha is called the awakened one. He's not called the good one. The Buddha is called the awakened one. In fact, his name was Gautam. He's called the Buddha because the word buddhi, buddhi is intellect. He awakened it. He didn't go with ritual, habit, genetic programming, social programming, Freudian conditioning. No. he got rid of all that. He introspected. He moved beyond conditioning, beyond social, psychological, childhood, genetic conditioning. So he awakened his buddhi. He became the Buddha. Now, that should be the aim of education. How do you do it? Well, two things. You get people to question, you get people to converse. There's very little genuine conversation. The paradox of this age, there's so much talk, there's so little conversation. Do you think social media is conversation? So one of my favorite authors, Theodore Zeldin, who's at Oxford, has written a book called Conversation. Very slim book. I'd encourage all of you to read it. And he says, we are not conversing anymore, neither in families, nor in workplaces. We're just talking. We're not conversing. Talking, you can talk all you like. Converse means to really listen, to be sensitive, to think, introspect. That's very little. The other is meditation, which is a conversation with your own self. And then to go beyond thinking. So one is thinking, the other is being, which is ontology, which is being, not gaining knowledge, which is epistemology. And so, you know, those of you who read Yoga Sutra by Patanjali, the very first shlok of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra is Yoga Chit Vritti Nirodh. Yoga, which is union with your true nature, is achieved by Chit Vritti Nirodh, by cessation of modifications of consciousness. In other words, cessation of thinking, cessation of, so then consciousness remains its own state, unmodified state. Otherwise, you know, so both roles, you need to think, but also you need to be. Only when you be, then you're unconditioned. Then when you think, then your thinking may be creative. It's not linked to your past thinking. It's not linear thinking. It can be lateral. It can be a break from the past. Otherwise, most of the thinking is traditional. It just carries on from the past. You know, so it's a chain of thought. So thought is always old. If you want to have new creative thought, then you have to break the chain. And sleep doesn't do it, by the way. So you have to go into a deep state of stillness. Yoga, Chit Vritti Nirodh. And then you are consciousness. Satchitanand, which is also state of great bliss and tranquility, because you're not bothered constantly about survival and, you know, social, psychological, or physical, which is what bothers us all the time. So you stay deep rest, and you can come back refreshed, and then you look at survival and questions of flourishing from a new level. So ontology, epistemology, and all that, and the world has been full of it. We modern people are into IPL matches. We're not into epistemology. We are into malls. And the business world of FMS is one institution which trains, just teaches us to the ways of glitter and shimmer. All right. So, yeah, all that glitters is not gold.
Now I would request Professor Bala Ganapati sir to speak something about the lecture, about this session, sir.
Yeah. Basically, there is one question in the chat box by Muhammad Irshad. As the economy of the world has taken an informational turn, argued by a range of thinkers in economics, including Peter Drucker, how do you see the philosophical foundation of it? Would you like to respond to that, Professor Vivek?
Peter Drucker, bless his soul, was one of the most original thinkers. He's called the father of modern management, and he was a very philosophical person. If you read any of his books, they're not very technical. They're very so-called commonsensical, and therefore they're very wise management texts. The problem that happened is when management, I think it's the industry of management, the industry of academics. You have to publish, so you have to have AAA journals and this and that. And then you have to have subdivision of labor. You have to become a specialist. You have to write something new. And therefore, common sense, in a sense, gets devalued. Because, I mean, you don't have to be an expert in common sense. Everybody knows common sense. I sometimes really say, this is self-destruction, but I honestly believe this. And I've actually said it. If you close all the management and economic schools of the world would be a far better place. Because if you did away with the FMS or Delhi School, all the Harvard business schools and economic schools, what would happen? People would say, okay, what do we need? We need clothes, we need food, We need, clean drinking water. We need clean air. Let's organize it. You don't need experts. Just like you don't need experts to get married. You don't need a Brahmin to get married and say, ये मंत्र पढ़ो और इतनी बार आके राउंड घूमो तभी जाके. ये तो बुद्धा कह रहा था. ये नहीं कि ये करो तो भगवान पहुंचोगे. या सूफी सेंट कहते हैं कि अल्लाह को पहुंचने के लिए, बुल्ले शाह. This can only happen in India, by the way. Bulle Shah, the great Sufi mystic, said, just imagine, this is the wisdom of India. This is India. Mandir dhade, masjid dhade, dhade, jo kuch denda. Bande ka dil na dhaiyo, rab dil vich renda. A contemporary of Nanak. Mandir dhade, masjid dhade, destroy the temple, destroy the mosque. Dhade, jo kuch denda, destroy everything you can destroy. Bande ka dil na dhayo, do not destroy the human heart. Rab dil vich renda, because the divine lives in the human heart. So these experts, whether in philosophy or in economics or in religion or in politics, can do great damage, because then common sense, clean air, clean water, global warming, good public health facilities, free education for all, commitment to work, not shirking, not working just for promotions, not just joining this. A lot of people are here in this program because you want to have it for your CV points. How many of you are here? Put your hand on the heart. Just because you want here for the love of knowledge. Saraswati के लिए कितने लोग आए हैं? लक्ष्मी के लिए आए हुए. FDP से कोई point मिलेगा, उसके बाद CV में add होगा, अगला promotion मिलेगा. चाहिए, अब तो UGC ने कहा तो करना पड़ेगा. But भाई हमारा तो aim सरस्वती था. And if you look at the goddess of learning, Saraswati, पूजा कमी होती है, लक्ष्मी की तो सब करते हैं दिवाली के दिन. उनके एक हाथ में तो किताब है, एक हाथ में वीणा है, बैठी है swan पे, and swan is supposed to be a creature mythologically which can separate water from milk, which is the art of discernment, knowledge. So I can go on and on. But Peter Drucker was a very wise guy. There are not many wise management thinkers left. We have become specialists, and therefore we have lost touch with common sense. हम लोग मैथमेटिक्स, हमारी जितनी PhD होती है मैनेजमेंट में, स्ट्रक्चरल इक्वेशन मॉडलिंग कर लो जिसको पता भी नहीं है कि क्या हो रहा है, उसके बाद अगर आपने इतने नंबर्स डाल दिए तो आपको PhD मिल जाए. मे बी फिलॉसफी स्टिल सेफ फ्रॉम दैट काइंड ऑफ स्टफ. इकोनॉमिक्स मैनेजमेंट नो लॉन्गर आर. But
yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Professor Vivek, for the wonderful lucid talk, as well as a very engaging session with our participants and addressing their questions and concerns. Thank you so much for being with us. Friends, we have heard two wise people coming forward and talking to us from their own disciplinary backgrounds, trying to explain how they look at philosophical foundations of their disciplines. And it's very interesting. In fact, in the previous session, we had Raghuram Raju, who was talking about how do we read. No? See, we are all teachers. In order to teach or in order to do research, what is very important fundamentally is how do you read. Reading is the first step, whether you want to grow as a researcher or as a teacher. So he was saying that while reading, we are forgetting the Poropaksha, and we are thinking that every reading is an answer itself, and we are limiting ourselves to the answers rather than looking at the questions. This is what he was trying to provoke us with, which in the previous session. And now we had Professor Vivek Suneja responding to us and trying to help us how normative economics or the liberal economics looks at various shades. And also, I must tell you, he is deeply involved in Buddhism, and he has done a lot of work, wonderful work related to Buddhism while being in economics. So that's what makes him to be more balanced in his approach towards economics as well as towards philosophy. That's where I really appreciate his contribution as well. Coming to the point that Ravneet has pointed out, like, yeah, it is true that teaching methodologies, we haven't in India, we haven't developed any works on teaching methodologies themselves. We are very fortunate and lucky that this Pandit Madan Mohan Malaviya centers are established to look at the teaching methodologies specifically. But before that, a research scholar who completes his PhD, who is trained in research, who is asked to focus himself in herself in reading books, is suddenly thrown into the classroom and asked to teach. So it is always like a very frustrating kind of thing. I would say it that you train somebody in mountaineering, and push him into a swimming pool and ask him to swim. How will you do that? You're asking somebody to do research, and then at the end of the day, you're asking him or her to go to the classroom and teach. Is it not quite incompatible? So this is the very interesting thing about the facticity of life, that the teachers, young teachers who have just completed their work and want to get into the job market, have to face quite unfortunate situation. And in this regard, I was looking for teaching methodologies. We have to evolve works on teaching methodologies so that a fresh teacher, a young teacher, would have some material to look at, read, and train himself or herself along with attending these workshops. And coming to this management and relating it to philosophy, friends, I must tell you this. It's not that I'm proud, but I want to inform you all. In fact, most of the IIMs, Indian Institute of Managements, are offering philosophy as one of the optionals to the management students. And I myself am teaching at IIM Rohtak. I'm giving special lectures at IIM Rohtak, introducing philosophy to the management students. So it is not that people are not concerned about philosophy, or people are not concerned about the worth and value of the value of philosophy. They have understood that. They are also coming forward to have more benefit. Only thing is, a proactive attitude from the philosophical community itself is required, which was unfortunately lacking some time back. It is coming up, and probably things would be better very soon. Just to conclude with one or two points, I hope you heard me yesterday urging all of you to think about one question that I have posed yesterday. How satisfied you are as a teacher is very important. Please do ask this question to yourself again and again, and this is a very important aspect. And in addition to that, for today, I have another very interesting and normal kind of question. Okay, one need not be an intellectual to answer these. These are all very preliminary kind of questions which help you to be self-reflective. The second, the other question that I have for today is, who was your favorite teacher? Can you think of, can you just stop and spend some time to think, who was your favorite teacher when you were a student? And if you can think and think of that person, whoever it may be, if you can list out, why, if you can write something on why you think that person is your favorite teacher, okay? And the question is, have you ever tried to imitate your favorite teacher, or try to do the best things that your favorite teacher has done? Okay, which means, have you given a chance to your students to consider you as a favorite teacher as you have considered your favorite teacher? This is my question to all of you. Please think about it. See, don't think that these are all silly kind of things and we have grown up and we don't have to care about such kind of things. Please, okay, because these faculty development programs are supposed to shake us, if possible, push us into a kind of a self-reflective mode, so that when we go back to our classroom, at least some amount of value addition has to be there. If that is not there, then this faculty development program is useless. Okay, so don't make our efforts useless. Please reflect on this. Who is your favorite teacher? And what are the why is so and so your favorite teacher? And have you ever tried to be like that in your profession so far? Is another important thing that I thought I should share with you and ask you to reflect upon. Thank you so much for sparing, like all of you may be busy with so many other things as well, but you understood the importance of this faculty development program and you have devoted your time here. And as the resource persons also have devoted their time for you. Thank you so much for being with us. And over to you, Suraj.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I would like to invite Nidhi ma'am to deliver a formal vote of thanks to the speaker. Nidhi
Yes,
ma'am, are you
thank
here?
you.
Oh,
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me, Surat sir?
yes.
Yes. So a million thanks to Professor Vivek Suneja sir for sparing his valuable time and delivering a lecture which has touched everybody's hearts. And we at Teaching Learning Center, Ramanujan College, are highly indebted to you, sir, to come over the Zoom session and deliver this lecture. So thank you, sir. And we hope to have a long association with you in the future as well. So this brings us to the end of the day 3 sessions, part 1 as well as part 2. And tomorrow we will be looking forward to some more exciting and thought-provoking sessions. And please stay tuned with us. And for any updates regarding quizzes and assignments, you can speak to Zerunisha ma'am for assistance as well as help. So in case Zerunisha ma'am, you have any queries then or clarifications to be made, then over to you in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And thank you, Vivek sir, and thank you, Professor Balaganpati sir. Now we should end the session, sir, with your permission.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Suraj. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir.